An HOA president named Gloria had a disabled paramedics ambulance van towed without warning, right before he was set to transport a dialysis patient. She called it an eyesore and mocked him for helping others from his driveway. But Cameron had powerful friends in uniform, and their quiet retaliation turned the whole neighborhood against her. And just wait until you hear how the fire department, a county commissioner, and 87 furious residents brought justice roaring back home. Cameron Blake didn't wear his years of service like a medal, but they showed. In the gentle way he steadied someone's elbow, in the habit of checking the rearview mirror twice before backing up. In the faint stiffness in his lower back, a souvenir from lifting people out of burning stairwells and mangled cars. He had been a paramedic for 2 decades, working shifts that blurred night and day, holidays and birthdays. After a spinal injury forced him into early retirement, most people would have settled for rest. But Cameron wasn't wired that way. He still wanted to serve. So he took what he knew best and gave it back to the community. With help from a few old firehouse buddies, Cameron repurposed a retired ambulance, gutted the back, installed a bench seat, a locking supply cabinet, even a lift assist arm for wheelchair users. The red and white exterior still bore faint outlines of the city EMS decal, but the sirens had been disconnected and the lights disabled. To the kids on the block, it was Mr. Cameron's van. To the seniors, he quietly shuttled to appointments, grocery stores, and pharmacies. It was hope on wheels, and to Cameron, it was a second chance at purpose. When he moved to Lakeside Ridge, a tightly managed HOA community with pristine sidewalks and a strict paint color policy, he didn't try to skirt the rules. He emailed the HOA board before the moving truck even arrived. He explained that the vehicle was not a commercial operation. It was his personal transport, kept clean and quiet, used to help others. The board responded politely. Yes, he could park it in his driveway. No, he couldn't run sirens or leave equipment on the lawn. He agreed instantly. And for nearly 5 months, there wasn't a single complaint, until one Tuesday afternoon. Cameron had just finished helping Mr. Ellison, an 83-year-old Navy vet with limited mobility, into the passenger seat. They were headed to the VA clinic for a routine checkup. It had taken 10 minutes to ease him down the front steps and secure his walker. But when Cameron stepped back around the van to load the rear door, the ambulance was gone. Just gone. At first, he thought maybe he'd misparked, that somehow he'd rolled forward, or someone had moved it as a prank. But the faint oil spot in the driveway confirmed it had been there just minutes ago. Then he saw it. A fluorescent pink slip stuck under a rock on his porch. One word, bold and underlined in blocky handwriting, towed. And beneath it, signed in curling script, Gloria, HOA President. There had been no knock on the door, no warning, no violation notice, no phone call. 1 minute his mobile clinic was helping a neighbor. The next, it had been dragged away like it was some junked-out eyesore. Cameron stood frozen on the porch, clutching the slip of paper, the silence around him deafening. Mr. Ellison sat buckled inside a vehicle that no longer existed. The breeze rustled the flags lining the perfect row of manicured lawns, and from across the street a neighbor's blinds twitched, just enough for him to notice. A knot formed in his stomach, not just of frustration, but of something sharper, something colder. He had followed every rule. He had made sure. And now someone had decided that helping people quietly and respectfully was a nuisance. He didn't know who Gloria was, but he knew one thing. This wasn't about the van. It was about control, and he wasn't going to roll over. Not this time. It didn't take Cameron long to learn the name behind the pink slip, Gloria Franklin, a name that floated around Lakeside Ridge like a cold draft, never said with joy, always in a lowered tone. She wasn't elected HOA president. She simply filled the vacuum when the previous one moved away, calling an emergency meeting over email, nominating herself, and never stepping aside. Gloria lived at the end of Rosecrest Lane in a sprawling 2-story home with white columns and stone lions flanking her driveway. The kind of house that looked like it judged you. So did its owner. Every day, Gloria walked the neighborhood with a clipboard and a pair of mirrored sunglasses, inspecting garden edges like a city official inspecting crime scenes. Lawn too high? Violation. Wreath on the door past the season? Citation. Driveway stained from a minor oil leak? Warning. She didn't just enforce the rules, she embodied them with an intensity that made even long-time residents nervous. And she hated Cameron's ambulance. To Gloria, the sight of the van, a symbol of emergency, injury, and imperfection, was an intrusion on her curated vision of suburban perfection. She called it unsightly, disruptive, and most disturbingly, a ghastly reminder of bodily failure. Her exact words. So when Cameron confronted her after the towing, holding the signed HOA email that clearly granted him permission, she barely glanced at it. "Rules evolve," she said coolly. "We can't have commercial vehicles cluttering driveways. This is a neighborhood, not a junkyard." Cameron tried to stay calm. He explained that the van was not a business. It wasn't for profit, wasn't running any signage, and that it existed solely to help neighbors. He reminded her, gently, that she was going against a prior board ruling and hadn't even notified the current members. But she just gave him that half smile people use when they think they're winning, the one that doesn't reach the eyes. Then Cameron, desperate, explained that he had a dialysis transport scheduled for the next morning. A frail widow, barely mobile, with no family. He needed the vehicle back immediately. Gloria paused, tilted her head, and then said, with something that sounded disturbingly close to amusement, "Maybe next time don't park a corpse wagon where people can see it." She didn't even blink. Cameron couldn't speak. He just stood there, the air sucked from his lungs, rage and disbelief mixing in a way that made his hands tremble. He hadn't felt this level of controlled fury since a 911 call in a high-rise years ago when an elevator delay nearly cost someone their life. That night, he stood alone in his driveway, staring at the empty concrete like it had betrayed him. The soft amber light from his porch cast long shadows, and somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on. Mr. Ortiz, his neighbor, a 78-year-old Korean War veteran, shuffled over with his walker, his hands shaking more than usual. Cameron didn't have the heart to break the news gently. When Mr. Ortiz learned his trip to the specialist had to be canceled, the old man didn't get angry. He just sat down slowly on the low brick ledge that lined the yard and covered his face. His shoulders hunched. And then he quietly cried, not from pain, but from powerlessness. Cameron stood there, fists clenched, watching this man, a man who'd once worn the uniform of the United States, reduced to tears by the petty actions of a woman with too much time and too little compassion. And at that moment, something changed in Cameron. It wasn't just about a towed vehicle anymore. It was about principle. It was about respect. And Gloria Franklin had crossed a line she didn't even realize existed. What Gloria Franklin didn't realize, what she couldn't have realized, was that Cameron Blake wasn't just a former paramedic. He was part of a brotherhood, and that brotherhood runs deep. In emergency services, bonds are forged in fire, under pressure, in the back of ambulances, and at 3 a.m. on rain-slicked highways. Cameron had stood shoulder to shoulder with men and women who now served as battalion chiefs, fire captains, EMS coordinators, and even policy advisors at the state level. He was the kind of man who had shown up for people without needing to be asked, and when the story of what happened to his van reached the ears of those who knew him, it didn't take long for a quiet fury to ripple through the ranks. Gloria had towed the wrong person's vehicle, and now she was about to learn what real community service looked like. On Monday morning, just after school drop-off time, a bright red ladder truck from Station 47 turned onto Rosecrest Lane. The vehicle was immaculate, its chrome gleaming, its crew in full uniform. They moved with calm precision, setting orange cones and unfurling hoses near the curb in front of Gloria's pristine home. They were conducting a hydrant pressure test, a perfectly routine, completely necessary public safety exercise. They parked sideways, blocking Gloria's driveway. Fully. Every neighbor who walked their dog or watered their lawn paused to look. Nobody said a word, but the air buzzed with unspoken recognition. By lunchtime, Gloria emerged from her house in a blazer and heels, a phone in one hand, and an expression somewhere between confusion and outrage. She tried to wave them off, called over, asked what they were doing. The captain smiled from under his helmet. "Just checking the hydrant system, ma'am. You know, emergency preparedness. Can't be too careful." That day, the test lasted from 8:15 a.m. to 4:42 p.m. Tuesday. The crew came back. But this time it wasn't for pressure testing. It was for a hazmat training drill. The entire sidewalk and street edge were taped off. Bright yellow signs marked emergency training in progress. Firefighters in full protective suits moved deliberately, setting up containment cones and fake spill zones right in front of Gloria's driveway. Again, the truck blocked her vehicle in. By Wednesday, Gloria had stopped trying to pretend it wasn't happening. She was calling the HOA hotline, the city non-emergency line, even trying to track down the fire marshal. But all she got was voicemail greetings and vague assurances. By Thursday morning, a third crew arrived, this time to test aerial ladder clearances for tree overgrowth, again citing public safety as their mission. They brought coffee. They brought patience. They parked. Gloria stormed out onto her porch, practically vibrating. She demanded an end to the harassment, claimed legal action was pending, threatened to contact the mayor. She shouted loud enough that even passing joggers slowed down to glance. That's when Fire Chief Marlon Ellis arrived, a man with silver at his temples, calm in his stride, and history with Cameron going back to their rookie days. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped forward, looked Gloria in the eye, and said, "We're just doing our community outreach work, ma'am. You know, helping people." And that was the moment Gloria realized something chilling. Cameron hadn't retaliated. He hadn't raised his voice, filed a counter-complaint, or made a scene. But somehow, this was still happening. It wasn't chaos. It was coordination. And it had just begun. Friday morning dawned clear and warm, the kind of morning where even the breeze felt like a fresh start. Cameron had been up since 6. The night before, with the help of a friend at the city impound lot, he'd retrieved the ambulance van. He had to pay a steep fine and file 3 separate forms just to prove it was legally parked in his own driveway. But when he turned the key that morning and the engine rumbled to life, it wasn't about logistics anymore. It was about reclaiming what had been taken, not just the van, but his purpose. At exactly 9 a.m., Cameron turned down Rosecrest Lane, rolling slow and steady. The van, though weathered from its ordeal, looked just like it had the day it arrived in Lakeside Ridge, clean, quiet, and unmistakably a vehicle of care. As he eased it into the driveway, something unexpected happened. Applause. Firefighters from Station 47 were lined up across the street, sipping coffee and leaning against the ladder truck. As Cameron stepped out and turned off the ignition, they clapped, not boisterously, not mockingly, but with the kind of solemn respect reserved for those who've earned it. Gloria came out seconds later, still in her pressed satin robe, cell phone already in hand. Her voice cut across the street like a blade. "This is harassment. I'm calling the sheriff, again." But this time it wasn't fear or frustration that met her words. It was silence. And then, as if on cue, a silver sedan pulled up next to the hydrant. Out stepped Councilman Darren Polk, retired fire medic, longtime friend of Cameron's, and current county commissioner. He didn't bother looking at Gloria. He walked straight to Cameron, shook his hand firmly, and handed him an envelope. Inside, a formal petition, 87 signatures strong, more than half the homeowners in Lakeside Ridge, calling for Gloria Franklin's immediate removal from the HOA board, citing abuse of power, unauthorized actions, and community disruption. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. And it was final. That evening, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, brighter. Cameron pulled up in the van to escort Mr. Ortiz to the rescheduled specialist appointment. The old man smiled the entire way, his eyes glistening with quiet gratitude. When they returned, dusk settling gently over the street, Cameron noticed something taped to his front door. Not a violation, not a warning. A card, handwritten, simple. Thank you for standing up to her. Welcome to the neighborhood." He stood for a moment on the porch, the sun dipping low, the van parked safely behind him. He hadn't needed to shout, to threaten, or to lower himself to Gloria's level. He had done what he always did, helped quietly, stood firm, and trusted the people who believed in doing right by others. Justice didn't need sirens. It just needed someone brave enough to stay parked in the right spot.